In a world of crime, deception, and disappearance, some names echo through time. The FBI's most wanted list isn't just for men. It has, on rare occasions, carried the faces of women whose crimes shocked the world. They vanished into shadows, crossing borders, changing identities, and rewriting who they were. Yet the truth always leaves traces. Tonight, we uncover the stories of 5 women whose names became synonymous with danger, deceit, and mystery. These are the top 5 most wanted women by the FBI. She wasn't your average criminal. She didn't carry a gun, didn't rob a bank, and never broke into a vault. But Ruja Ignatova stole something far more valuable: trust. When she walked onto a stage, her confidence filled the room. Dark hair perfectly styled, designer gown shimmering under the spotlight, a diamond necklace catching the flash of every camera. To the crowd, she was more than a businesswoman. She was a visionary, the woman who would change how the world understood money. But behind that smile, behind every word she spoke, was a web of deceit that would trap millions. The rise of the crypto queen. Ruja Ignatova was born in Bulgaria in 1980. Her family moved to Germany when she was young, and from the beginning she stood out. Intelligent, articulate, ambitious. She earned her PhD from the University of Constance, then went on to study at Oxford University. She spoke multiple languages and was known for her sharp mind. To those around her, she seemed destined for greatness. And maybe she was, just not the kind of greatness anyone expected. In 2014, Ruja introduced the world to something called OneCoin, a new cryptocurrency. She promised it would be bigger than Bitcoin, a revolution for people who missed the first crypto boom. Her pitch was simple. Bitcoin made millionaires. Now it's your turn. She called OneCoin the Bitcoin killer, claiming it was faster, safer, smarter, and ready to make ordinary people rich. And millions believed her. OneCoin spread like wildfire. There were seminars in luxury hotels, massive conventions in London, Dubai, and Singapore. Thousands attended her events, chanting her name as if she were a rock star. On stage, she stood under banners that read, "Join the financial revolution." She said, "In 2 years, nobody will talk about Bitcoin anymore." People bought OneCoin tokens by the thousands. Some invested their savings. Others sold homes. There were families, retirees, and even students, all desperate to be part of the future. But what they didn't know, there was no blockchain. There was no mining, no decentralized network. Everything was fake, a digital illusion created to mimic success. The hidden truth. Inside the company, cracks began to show. Emails later revealed that Ruja knew OneCoin was fake. In one message, she allegedly wrote to a colleague, "Take the money and run, because this is not sustainable." She wasn't building the future. She was building an empire of lies. Between 2014 and 2017, OneCoin brought in over $4 billion worldwide. It became one of the largest financial scams in history. But Ruja wasn't alone. Her right-hand man, Sebastian Greenwood, managed recruitment operations, convincing people to invest through educational packages. Her brother, Konstantin Ignatov, helped run the company's day-to-day operations. Together, they created a global network that looked legitimate. Offices, employees, websites, even lawyers. But every part of it was designed to move money, not to build technology. the disappearance. Then came October 25th, 2017. Ruja had a major company event planned in Lisbon, Portugal. She was expected to take the stage, as usual, and announce the next big step for OneCoin. But she never showed up. Instead, she boarded a Ryanair flight from Sofia, Bulgaria to Athens, Greece, and vanished. No one saw her again. Her phones went silent. Her offices suddenly stopped hearing from her. Investors panicked. At first, people thought it was just a business delay, but as weeks turned into months, it became clear Ruja Ignatova was gone. Interpol issued a red notice. The FBI began investigating. By the time they caught up, her empire had already collapsed. Her brother was arrested in 2019 and later pleaded guilty to fraud and money laundering. Greenwood, too, was caught and sentenced. But Ruja? She had disappeared like smoke. Theories and shadows. The mystery of Ruja's disappearance became global news. Some say she fled to Dubai, where she had connections and hidden accounts. Others believe she underwent plastic surgery and now lives under a new identity, possibly in Russia or Eastern Europe. There were even whispers that she might be dead. A Bulgarian investigative journalist once claimed that Ruja was murdered in 2018, possibly on the orders of organized criminals who wanted to silence her. But there's no proof, only rumors. The FBI believes she may have changed her face and name. Interpol lists her as armed and dangerous. And the United States government has offered a $5 million reward for information leading to her arrest. Even now, her case remains one of the most puzzling modern mysteries. She managed to scam the world using nothing but charisma, intelligence, and timing. The legacy of the scam. When OneCoin collapsed, it left a trail of devastation. Thousands lost everything: life savings, retirement funds, homes. Some of its victims took their own lives. Others are still trying to recover their losses. In documentaries and podcasts, victims describe Ruja as hypnotic. She could make anyone believe anything. She stood on stage, dripping in jewels, and promised the impossible, and somehow she made people want to believe it. In 2022, the FBI officially added her to the 10 most wanted fugitives list, one of the very few women ever to appear there. She joined names like Osama bin Laden and Ted Bundy, a sign of how serious her crimes were. And yet, despite being one of the most recognizable fugitives in the world, she remains invisible. No verified sightings, no solid leads. It's almost poetic. The woman who built her empire on illusion became an illusion. The crypto queen's shadow. Some investigators believe she may still be controlling her fortune from afar through secret accounts or shell companies. Others think her empire fell apart and she's living in hiding, terrified that her old partners might come for her. Every few months, someone claims to have seen her in Greece, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe. Each lead fades away. Her brother once said in court, "She told me that when she felt the net closing in, she would disappear for good." And she did. No one knows if Ruja Ignatova is alive or dead, but her story stands as a chilling reminder. In the digital age, the most dangerous criminals don't need weapons. They just need believers. Ruja Ignatova, the self-proclaimed crypto queen, the woman who convinced the world she could change money forever, and then vanished with billions. Some say she's sipping champagne on a private island. Others say she's buried beneath the secrets she created. But until she's found, one question remains. How does someone so famous simply disappear? Donna Jean Wilmot was not a criminal born from greed or chaos. Her story began with ideas, radical beliefs, the kind that once burned bright in the minds of young people during America's most divided years. But as time would prove, ideas can be just as dangerous as any weapon. In the late 1960s and early 70s, the United States was a nation split in half. The Vietnam War was raging. Protests filled college campuses. People were angry, afraid, and desperate for change. And in the middle of that storm, groups began to form. Groups that believed words were no longer enough. Among them was an organization called the Weather Underground, a radical left-wing faction that believed only direct action could end what they saw as a corrupt government. Donna Wilmot, born in 1951 in Cleveland, Ohio, was one of the young minds drawn into that fire. She was educated, politically active, and believed deeply in social justice. But like many others in that era, her beliefs took her down a dangerous path, one that would eventually put her on the FBI's radar for decades. It started small: protests, rallies, pamphlets. But Donna's convictions grew stronger with each passing year. She joined causes supporting the Puerto Rican independence movement, aligning herself with the Armed Forces of National Liberation, known as FALN, a militant organization responsible for bombings across the United States. They claimed to fight for Puerto Rican liberation, but the FBI saw them differently, as domestic terrorists. Donna wasn't the kind of person you'd imagine as a fugitive. Those who knew her described her as calm, thoughtful, even gentle. But when the political became personal, she changed. By the late 1970s, she was working alongside radical activists planning bombings against military and government targets. And in 1982, she crossed a line she could never return from. Together with a small network of militants, Donna helped plan the breakout of William Morales, a bomb maker for FALN, from a federal prison hospital in New York City. Morales had been seriously injured in an explosion while making bombs. He was a key figure, and his escape would send shockwaves through law enforcement. According to FBI reports, Donna and her associates smuggled plans, equipment, and disguises into the facility. Morales used a homemade rope and managed to escape through a window, breaking both legs in the process. He fled the U.S. and eventually reached Cuba, where he was granted asylum. It was one of the boldest prison escapes of its time, and Donna Wilmot was one of the names behind it. But that wasn't her only act of defiance. A few years later, she was linked to another plot, this time an attempt to break Assata Shakur out of prison, the infamous fugitive convicted of killing a New Jersey state trooper. Shakur had escaped in 1979, and while authorities believe she'd already fled to Cuba, the FBI accused Wilmot of being part of an effort to support her and other fugitives. For Donna, these acts weren't crimes. They were missions. In her mind, she was helping freedom fighters, not fugitives. But for the FBI, she was aiding terrorists. By 1985, her name was added to the list of the FBI's most wanted. A photo of her circulated in post offices and police departments across the country. A calm, serious woman with eyes that seemed to look straight through the lens. The caption read, "Wanted for conspiracy, harboring a fugitive, and possession of explosives." While others were caught or surrendered, Donna vanished. She disappeared from the radar completely, leaving behind no trace of her whereabouts. For years, she lived underground, part of a hidden network of radicals who helped each other survive under fake names and false documents. The years passed, and the fire that once burned in the streets began to fade. The Cold War ended. The movements quieted. But Donna Wilmot remained a ghost. For over a decade, the FBI searched for her, following whispers, dead ends, and old connections. They never stopped looking, but she never surfaced. Then, in 1994, a knock on a door in Pittsburgh changed everything. Federal agents surrounded a modest home in the suburbs. Inside was Donna Jean Wilmot. Older now, her once fiery idealism replaced by quiet resolve. When agents entered, she didn't resist. She simply said, "It's over." After nearly 10 years as one of the FBI's most wanted women, Donna was arrested without a struggle. The news made national headlines, a relic of the radical era finally caught.
In court, she didn't deny her past. Instead, she stood by her beliefs. She told the judge, "I did what I thought was right at the time. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Prosecutors painted a different picture. They called her a dangerous extremist, a conspirator in terrorist plots. The trial drew attention from both sides. Some saw her as a symbol of political passion gone too far, others as a criminal who'd escaped justice for too long. In 1995, she was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for aiding and abetting fugitives and possessing false identification documents. Compared to what she could have faced, it was a light sentence. But for Donna, the time behind bars was enough to reflect on everything she had done. When she was released, she quietly faded from the public eye. No interviews, no books, no documentaries.
Just silence. She disappeared from the headlines as quickly as she had returned to them. Today, her name occasionally resurfaces in discussions about radical movements of the 70s and 80s. She's often described as the woman who went underground for her beliefs. But the truth of Donna Wilmot's story lies somewhere between idealism and guilt, between conviction and regret. Her case remains one of the few examples of how deeply political extremism can transform ordinary people. She wasn't in it for money, power, or fame. She was driven by belief. And that belief made her both hero and criminal, depending on who you ask. The FBI's profile of her now sits among the archives, a black and white reminder of a time when revolution burned hotter than reason. She may have served her time, but her legacy lingers in the questions she left behind. Was she a revolutionary or a traitor? Was she a freedom fighter or a terrorist? Donna never gave a clear answer, and maybe she didn't have one, because sometimes the line between fighting for something and destroying it completely is thinner than anyone wants to admit. In the end, she lived long enough to see the world she fought for change in ways she could never imagine. But she also lived with the weight of knowing that her pursuit of justice had turned her into what she hated most, a fugitive from the very freedom she claimed to defend. Her story isn't of violence or greed, but of belief taken too far, of a woman who thought she could fight injustice by breaking the law, and in doing so, became one of the FBI's most wanted women in America.
Assata Shakur's life reads like a thriller novel, but it is painfully real, marked by tragedy, defiance, and escape. Born Joanne Deborah Byron in 1947 in New York City, she grew up in a world divided by race, poverty, and inequality. Her family moved frequently, struggling to find stability, but even in her youth, she displayed a strong sense of justice and a fierce will to survive. By the time she reached her teens, she had already encountered the harsh realities of racism and police brutality, experiences that would shape the rest of her life. In the late 1960s, as civil rights movements swept across the United States, Shakur became politically active. She joined the Black Panther Party, an organization fighting systemic oppression, and later became involved with the Black Liberation Army, a more militant group advocating for armed resistance against a system she saw as corrupt and oppressive. To Shakur, these organizations were not criminal enterprises. They were tools to protect her community, to fight back against decades of injustice. But the government, and particularly the FBI, saw things differently. Her notoriety began to grow during the early 1970s, a period of intense conflict between militant groups and law enforcement. Assata was accused of participating in numerous criminal activities, including bank robberies and shootouts, but the most defining event came in May 1973 on the New Jersey Turnpike. On that day, she and 2 companions were stopped by state troopers after a traffic violation. What followed was a violent confrontation, leaving 1 trooper dead and another injured. Shakur herself was shot multiple times and arrested at the scene. The incident sparked a firestorm of controversy.
Supporters argued she acted in self-defense against a corrupt and racist police system, while authorities claimed she had been involved in the murder. Her trial became one of the most high-profile cases of the decade. Witnesses contradicted each other, evidence was contested, and the media portrayed her as both a dangerous criminal and a symbol of racial injustice. The courtroom was tense, charged with the raw emotions of the era: anger, fear, and the unrelenting weight of a society divided. In 1977, Shakur was convicted of first-degree murder and several other charges, receiving a life sentence in a New Jersey prison. Her conviction, however, did not end the saga. During her incarceration, Shakur maintained her innocence and became a symbol of resistance to many in the Black liberation movement. Her letters and statements from prison portrayed her as a woman determined to fight back against an unjust system, someone unwilling to surrender her dignity or voice. In 1979, she executed what would become the most daring escape of her life. Assisted by supporters on the outside, she managed to flee the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. The escape was meticulously planned. Disguises, carefully timed movements, and trusted allies ensured her exit from the heavily guarded facility. Within days, she disappeared completely, leaving the American authorities scrambling. Her flight led to an international manhunt. By 1984, she had surfaced in Cuba, where she was granted political asylum by Fidel Castro. Cuba viewed her not as a criminal, but as a political exile, a victim of the United States' flawed justice system. The FBI, however, branded her as a fugitive terrorist and added her to their 10 most wanted fugitives list, offering a reward for information leading to her capture. To this day, she remains the first woman on the FBI's list to be granted political asylum in another country. The years in Cuba were far from quiet. Shakur lived under protection, aware that any exposure could lead to her extradition or assassination. She gave interviews to sympathetic journalists, writing memoirs detailing her experiences with systemic oppression, police brutality, and her struggle for liberation. Her narrative painted a complex picture: a woman caught between being a symbol and being hunted, between her ideals and the reality of violent acts that occurred during her radical years. Her story is one of contradictions. To her supporters, she is a hero, an emblem of the fight against racism and oppression, a woman who refused to bow to a system stacked against her. To her detractors, she is a convicted murderer who escaped justice and now lives freely in another country, untouchable. These conflicting perceptions have kept her story alive in the public consciousness for decades. Even now, decades after her escape, Shakur's name evokes strong reactions.
Books, documentaries, and songs reference her legacy, and her image is often used in discussions about race, justice, and the American penal system. The FBI still lists her as a fugitive, maintaining a $2 million reward for information that could lead to her capture, but every effort to extradite her from Cuba has failed. Political tensions between the U.S. and Cuba, combined with international laws, have created a protective shield around her. Her life in exile is cloaked in mystery. Few details are verified, and most of what is known comes from carefully controlled statements she has made. Observers report that she lives a quiet life, cautious, aware of the global attention she continues to attract. The woman who once roared on the streets, who fought back against police and government agents, now navigates a world of caution and reflection. Yet, her influence remains powerful. Activists often cite her resilience and commitment to her ideals as inspirational, while critics point to the consequences of her actions as a warning of what radicalization can lead to. Her story raises difficult questions about justice, morality, and the intersection of race and law enforcement in America.
Asada Shakur's life reminds the world that history is rarely black and white. She embodies the tension between oppression and rebellion, between a system of law and the human desire for freedom. Her escape, survival, and continued asylum in Cuba make her one of the most famous fugitives in history, and certainly one of the FBI's most wanted women, whose story continues to captivate the world. No photograph, no headline, no statement can fully capture the complexity of her life. She is a fugitive, a revolutionary, a survivor, and a symbol. Asada Shakur remains in hiding, untouchable by the reach of American law, yet omnipresent in the conversations about justice, race, and the power of resistance. Every mention of her name conjures images of a woman unbowed, living a life dictated not by fear, but by conviction. Her story is a cautionary tale, a testament to the extremes to which belief can drive a person, and a reminder that some names, once written in history, never fade. And while the FBI still searches, decades later, she remains just out of reach, a living ghost, a woman who challenged a system and managed, somehow, to escape it entirely.
Elaine Parent was a woman who understood the art of invisibility. She wasn't flashy, she didn't make speeches, and she didn't leave traces that were easy to follow. But behind her quiet exterior, she built a life defined by deception, crime, and elusiveness that would eventually land her among the FBI's most wanted women. Born in 1934 in Boston, Massachusetts, Elaine grew up during a time of upheaval and post-war change. From a young age, she displayed a remarkable intelligence and adaptability, traits that would later serve her in ways far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As she moved through adulthood, she became known for her charm and social skill. People trusted her, often without question, and that trust became the tool she would use to manipulate those around her. Her criminal life began with theft and fraud, but it evolved quickly into something more audacious. Elaine had a talent for identity theft long before it became a term commonly known to the public. She was able to assume the identities of dead people, forge documents, and live under these assumed names for years at a time, all without being detected. Banks, social security offices, and government agencies were unable to catch her in her early years. It was as if she could vanish into the cracks of society, always one step ahead of those who sought to stop her. But the deception didn't stop at paperwork. Elaine Parent is suspected of more serious crimes, including murder, although authorities could never gather enough evidence to secure convictions. In the 1970s, she was linked to a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances of elderly individuals whose identities she assumed. It was her signature: find a person, take their identity, erase them from the public eye, and step into their life as if it had always belonged to her. Her cunning wasn't just in the acts themselves, but in the way she lived afterward. She changed states, moved cities, sometimes crossed borders, always creating new aliases, new identities, and leaving behind nothing but confusion and questions. Law enforcement officers described her as a chameleon, someone who could step into any role seamlessly, a woman who could be a grandmother in one town and an heiress in another, all within months. Elaine's methods were bold. She didn't use violence to take over identities. She relied on meticulous research, patience, and the ability to read people. She'd spend months learning a person's habits, studying their social connections, and memorizing details until she could perfectly assume their life. Once she had, she would move, sometimes thousands of miles away, to begin again, leaving police and victims' families bewildered. The FBI eventually caught on to her activities after patterns began to emerge. They noticed similarities in cases involving stolen identities of elderly individuals, unusual financial transactions under names of deceased people, and the sudden disappearance of women in their communities. With each new lead, Elaine was always just ahead, leaving only shadows for authorities to chase. Her notoriety grew, not only because of her crimes, but because of her remarkable ability to evade capture. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Elaine Parent had become a name whispered among law enforcement circles as the world's most wanted woman. She had eluded capture for decades, all while living a life of deception, moving between identities and seemingly enjoying the thrill of the chase. Despite being on the FBI's radar, she continued to operate under assumed identities. She would change residences frequently, apply for false identification documents, and continue to access bank accounts and credit cards under stolen names. Her crimes were nonviolent, but deeply unsettling. The idea that someone could so completely erase themselves from one life and step into another, leaving victims to wonder if their loved ones were alive or dead, created fear that lingered far beyond the crime itself. Elaine Parent's story is also a lesson in patience and ingenuity. Unlike criminals who make rash decisions, she carefully calculated every move. She understood bureaucracy, she understood people, and she understood the media. By keeping a low profile and avoiding patterns that could be traced, she managed to stay invisible for decades. Every time law enforcement got close, she vanished again, almost as if she anticipated their moves before they happened. What makes Elaine's story chilling is the thought of the lives affected by her crimes. Families were left grieving for loved ones who may have been alive. Financial institutions were defrauded of thousands, and yet, the woman behind it all remained untouchable. Her actions forced agencies to rethink procedures around identity verification, and her ability to evade detection made her one of the most enigmatic figures in FBI history. By the 2000s, despite modern technology and the rise of digital tracking, Elaine Parent remained elusive. Her use of multiple identities, careful documentation, and international travel made her a nearly impossible target. Authorities believed she may have had help or possibly even traveled abroad to countries where extradition would be difficult. Each lead brought hope, but also frustration, as the trail inevitably went cold. Elaine Parent died in 2011, still having eluded capture. Her death marked the end of a life shrouded in mystery, but the legend of the world's most wanted woman continues to captivate those who study criminal history. She was a master of disguise, deception, and psychological manipulation, a criminal who relied not on brute force, but on intellect and foresight. She was a ghost in life, a phantom in the system, and her story lingers long after her disappearance, inspiring fear, awe, and fascination. A woman who, by all appearances, could disappear at will, leaving the world forever questioning her next move, and reminding everyone that some criminals are invisible, not because they are small, but because they are brilliant. Catherine Ann Power was once an ordinary young woman, the kind who smiled easily, took her studies seriously, and dreamed of a future full of promise. She was born in 1949 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and grew up in a middle-class family that valued education, morality, and stability. But beneath her calm exterior, the world she lived in was changing rapidly. The late 1960s were turbulent years in America, marked by the Vietnam War, widespread protests, and a generation questioning authority in every possible way. Power, like many of her peers, was swept into the currents of radical activism. She attended the University of Massachusetts at Boston, studying sociology and becoming increasingly aware of what she considered injustices in society. She attended anti-war rallies, joined student organizations, and found herself drawn to the rhetoric of revolutionary groups advocating for dramatic social change. For a while, her activism seemed innocent, participating in marches, organizing meetings, distributing pamphlets. But gradually, the desire to take action escalated into something more dangerous. In 1970, along with a small group of friends, Catherine participated in a bank robbery in Massachusetts. Their intent was not purely financial gain. They claimed it was to fund anti-war activities. But the robbery quickly escalated into violence. During the heist, a police officer was shot and killed. That single act changed her life forever. Catherine and her accomplices fled immediately, abandoning their normal lives and disappearing into a world of fugitives, pursued relentlessly by law enforcement. Catherine Ann Power was only 21 years old when she became one of the FBI's most wanted women. She had crossed a line that left no room for negotiation, no second chances. The law demanded justice, and the FBI began a nationwide search, distributing wanted posters and issuing alerts to police departments across the country. Power's life on the run was defined by constant fear, secrecy, and isolation. She changed her name, adopted new identities, and moved from city to city. She stayed with friends who sympathized with her cause, blending into communities and working low-profile jobs to survive. Each day was a calculated effort to remain unseen, to avoid the network of authorities hunting her. Yet, despite the fear, she never completely abandoned her ideological beliefs. She justified her actions as necessary for the greater good, a fight against a government she no longer trusted. The years stretched into a decade, then two, and Catherine became a ghost. People she knew as friends or neighbors had no idea of the life she had left behind, no inkling that the young woman next door had once taken a life in the name of revolution. She maintained a low profile, avoiding attention, never contacting family for fear of revealing her location. By the 1980s, Catherine Ann Power's name had become synonymous with the turbulent era of radical activism. Law enforcement officers still circulated wanted posters, and the FBI continued to classify her as dangerous. The case was studied in criminology textbooks, noted for its combination of youthful idealism, radicalization, and violent crime. Despite the pressure of being on the run, she managed to survive, relying on a combination of careful planning, luck, and the occasional help from sympathetic acquaintances. Her ability to remain free for nearly 2 decades astonished authorities. They monitored leads, interviewed friends and associates, and scoured records, but Catherine seemed always to be one step ahead, vanishing whenever a trail appeared. In 1993, after more than 20 years on the run, Catherine made a decision that would shock many. She turned herself in to law enforcement in Boston. She had been living quietly under an assumed name, reflecting on her life, and realized she could no longer continue the fugitive existence. Her surrender was voluntary, but it was calculated. She knew that by coming forward, she could control the narrative, show remorse, and perhaps seek a path to redemption. Her trial was closely followed by the media and the public. Catherine Ann Power did not shy away from admitting her crimes, acknowledging the gravity of taking a life during the bank robbery. But she also explained her motivations, the youthful idealism and misguided sense of justice that had driven her to commit acts she would later regret. Psychologists noted her remorse, her attempts to understand the consequences of her actions, and her desire to contribute positively to society after serving her sentence. In 1993, she was sentenced to prison, serving a total of 24 years before her release. During incarceration, she participated in educational programs, counseling, and outreach, working to demonstrate rehabilitation and personal growth. Upon release, she continued to live a quiet life, committed to avoiding further trouble and contributing to society in meaningful ways.
The story of Catherine Ann Power is a complicated one. She was a fugitive, a criminal, and a radical in her youth, but she was also human, capable of reflection, remorse, and transformation. Her case serves as a reminder of how ordinary individuals can be swept up in extraordinary circumstances, how idealism can sometimes turn dangerous, and how redemption is possible even after the gravest mistakes. She remains a figure of fascination, not for the notoriety of her crime alone, but for the choices she made to live as a fugitive for decades, for the audacity to vanish from the world and escape the law for so long, and for the courage to eventually confront the consequences of her actions. Catherine Ann Power's story is a testament to the complexity of crime, morality, and the human capacity for both error and redemption. Even now, her life is continued to be studied by criminologists, historians, and true crime enthusiasts. The narrative is layered, challenging simple definitions of right and wrong. She was once on the FBI's most wanted list, a young woman who committed murder, then spent decades evading justice, and yet in the end, she took responsibility for her actions, proving that even those who disappear into the shadows can eventually step back into the light. Catherine Ann Power's tale is not just about crime. It is about the fragility of ideals, the consequences of choices made in youth, and the long, difficult path toward redemption. Her name remains etched in FBI records and criminal history, a reminder of a turbulent era, the dangers of radicalization, and the enduring human story behind every fugitive.
As we close the files on these 5 extraordinary women, one thing becomes clear. The stories of Ruja Ignatova, Donna Jean Wilmot, Asada Shakur, Elaine Parent, and Catherine Ann Power are not just tales of crime. They're stories of brilliance, ambition, ideology, and the dark paths that can emerge when human desire meets opportunity. Some vanished into shadows, leaving billions, secrets, or ideologies behind. Some surrendered to face the consequences of their choices. And some, like the crypto queen or Asada Shakur, remain mysteries, their fates unknown, their legends growing with each passing year. These women remind us that crime isn't always about brute force. Sometimes it is about cunning, planning, and the ability to disappear when the world is watching. They are a testament to the lengths humans will go for power, for belief, or sometimes simply to escape the consequences of their actions. The FBI continues to search for those still at large, and though decades may pass, the stories of these women will never fade from history. Their lives, crimes, and disappearances are forever etched into the annals of true crime. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of the world's most wanted. Every year, the FBI releases its list of the 10 most wanted fugitives, the men and women who've managed to disappear into the shadows after committing crimes so serious they've shaken entire nations. These are not just faces on posters. They're real people who've evaded justice for years, sometimes decades. Murderers, cartel leaders, fugitives who vanished without a trace. And yet, somewhere out there, they're still walking free. Tonight, we uncover their stories, one by one, the crimes they committed, the trails they left behind, and the manhunts that still continue to this day. This is not just a list. It's a window into the darkest corners of human ambition, greed, and revenge. These are the top 10 FBI most wanted fugitives of 2025, and each name carries a story you won't forget. Let's begin. In the heart of Mexico's Sinaloa state, where mountains hide more secrets than the streets below, a name began to echo quietly among men who lived by guns, money, and fear. That name was Fausto Isidro Mesa Flores. To the people who feared him, he was Chapo Isidro. To law enforcement, he became a shadow, one they could never quite catch. Born in 1982 in the town of Navajoa, Sonora, Mesa Flores grew up in a place where opportunity was scarce, and the drug trade was a way of life. Like many boys of his generation, he learned early that the border between survival and crime could be thin, and that loyalty in the world of cartels was often paid for in blood. As a young man, Fausto watched the rise of the Beltran Leyva organization, a cartel known for its ruthless control and deep connections. He started small, a courier, a lookout, another nameless soldier. But he was sharp, cautious, and quick to understand the logic of power. When others flaunted their money, he stayed quiet. When others fought for attention, he learned to disappear. Over time, that instinct to stay unseen became his greatest weapon. By the mid-2000s, Fausto Isidro Mesa Flores had become a trusted lieutenant in the Beltran Leyva cartel, working under the infamous Arturo Beltran Leyva, a man feared even by his own men. It was during these years that Chapo Isidro earned his reputation as both a strategist and a survivor. He managed the movement of tons of narcotics across Mexico's rugged terrain: cocaine, meth, marijuana, everything that could cross into the United States for profit. When Arturo Beltran Leyva was killed in a shootout with Mexican Marines in 2009, many believed the cartel would collapse. Rivals celebrated, thinking the empire would crumble without its head. But while most lieutenants fled or were hunted down, Mesa Flores did something else. He waited. In the silence that followed the chaos, he began rebuilding. The organization split into factions, and Mesa Flores emerged as the leader of his own group, a smaller but lethal network that became known as the Mesa Flores Organization. Based in Sinaloa, it quickly aligned with remnants of the Beltran Leyva group and parts of the Juarez cartel, forming new connections in the constant reshuffling of Mexico's underworld. His empire wasn't the largest, but it was resilient. While bigger cartels like Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation fought bloody wars for national dominance, Mesa Flores quietly expanded into drug distribution, money laundering, and gun running. He maintained routes through Sonora and Baja California, using legitimate businesses as fronts and corrupt officials for protection. Unlike other cartel bosses, Chapo Isidro rarely appeared in public. There were no flashy videos, no golden rifles, no online fame. He didn't need it. His name alone carried weight, whispered by those who owed him or feared his reach. By 2013, U.S. authorities had begun connecting dots. The FBI and DEA traced shipments of meth and cocaine directly to Mesa Flores' network. The operation stretched from Mexican labs to distribution points across the southwestern United States. In 2013, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia indicted him on multiple charges, including drug trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering. Still, he vanished before they could touch him.
For more than a decade, Fausto Isidro Mesa Flores has managed to evade both Mexican and American authorities. Reports place him deep within Sinaloa's countryside, protected by armed guards and loyal communities who view him as a provider rather than a criminal. In those regions, it's said he pays for food, roads, even schools, creating an unspoken loyalty that makes capture nearly impossible. What makes him particularly dangerous is his intelligence. Unlike many cartel leaders driven by ego, Mesa Flores operates with methodical patience. He doesn't seek control of cities, he controls corridors. His strength lies in his ability to blend the old-school cartel discipline with the modern methods of digital communication and finance. Investigators describe him as the ghost trafficker,
He communicates through layers of intermediaries, moves frequently, and avoids large-scale violence that attracts national attention. Each year, rumors emerge that he's been cited, that he's been killed, that he's retired. Each time, they fade into uncertainty. The man who built his life on invisibility continues to live by it. For law enforcement, Meza Flores remains one of the most frustrating figures in the global drug war. The FBI has offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his arrest. Yet, despite years of intelligence, raids, and informants, not a single photograph or verified location has surfaced since 2015. To some in Mexico, he's become a myth, a ghost that walks among the mountains. To others, he's a reminder that no matter how many arrests are made, another figure will always rise in the shadows. As of 2025, Fausto Isidro Meza Flores remains at large, one of the most elusive fugitives on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. He's the embodiment of a criminal evolution, a man who learned that the key to surviving in a world of greed and betrayal is to become invisible. And that invisibility has made him one of the most dangerous men alive.
It started, as so many dark stories do, with promises. Promises of fame, money, and a chance to shine in front of a camera. But behind the bright lights and easy smiles, there was something colder, something cruel. At the center of it all stood a man named Michael James Pratt. Born in 1980 in New Zealand, Michael Pratt didn't come from the world of crime or violence. He was ambitious, smart, and, by most accounts, charming. In his 20s, he discovered the power of the internet, not as a tool for connection, but as a way to make money from other people's dreams. He realized something early. In the age of social media and online content, fame itself had become a currency, and he could exploit that hunger. Around 2012, Pratt co-founded what appeared to be a legitimate adult film company in San Diego, California. The brand, Girls Do Porn, advertised itself as a modeling agency that connected young women with opportunities in glamour or lifestyle shoots. The ads were clean, friendly, almost wholesome. They promised quick cash for simple work and guaranteed that the videos would never appear online. For many women, especially college students or those struggling financially, it sounded like an escape. But what they didn't know was that behind those messages, Pratt was setting a trap. Once the women arrived, things changed. Instead of modeling, they were pressured into performing explicit scenes. Their consent was coerced through lies, manipulation, and sometimes outright threats. When they resisted, they were reminded that they had already signed paperwork, or that their travel expenses had to be repaid. It was psychological control masked as business. And when the filming ended, Pratt broke every promise. The videos were uploaded to the company's websites, viewed by millions of strangers, and tied forever to the victims' names. For many of those young women, life collapsed. Some were harassed online, others ostracized by family or friends. Jobs were lost, relationships ended. The damage was deep and lasting. And all the while, Michael James Pratt was making millions. By 2015, his operation had become one of the most profitable of its kind. Girls Do Porn videos appeared across the internet, generating enormous advertising revenue and subscription fees. To outsiders, it looked like another adult entertainment success story. But to the FBI, and later to the courts, it was organized exploitation, a criminal enterprise built on deceit. In 2019, after years of victim statements and investigative work, a federal grand jury in San Diego charged Pratt and several of his partners with sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, and production of child pornography. Authorities called it one of the most significant online exploitation cases in U.S. history. More than 100 victims had come forward.
But when indictments were unsealed, Michael James Pratt was nowhere to be found. He had vanished. According to investigators, Pratt fled the United States in 2019, traveling through several countries before disappearing entirely. His flight was fast, precise, and well-planned, suggesting he'd prepared his escape long before the FBI arrived. He left behind co-defendants who would later plead guilty and face prison time. He left behind victims still searching for justice, and he left behind an online empire now frozen by law enforcement.
For years, Pratt seemed to evaporate from the digital map. Interpol issued a red notice, and the FBI placed him on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to his capture. His name joined the ranks of violent fugitives, terrorists, and drug lords, a stark reminder that not all predators carry guns. Some carry cameras. The trail went cold until 2022. Acting on intelligence shared between U.S. and international agencies, law enforcement located him in Madrid, Spain. He was living under a false identity, hiding in plain sight in one of Europe's busiest capitals. He'd been on the run for 3 years. When Spanish authorities moved in, Pratt was arrested without a fight. No shootout, no dramatic chase, just a quiet end to a long deception. He was held in custody while the United States filed for extradition. But extradition is slow, tangled in paperwork and appeals. For months, he fought to avoid being returned to American soil. Every delay meant more waiting for those he had hurt. In 2023, Spain finally approved his extradition. The following year, Pratt was flown to California to face trial. Inside the courtroom, victims sat only a few feet away from the man who had destroyed their privacy. Many described the encounter as surreal. After years of seeing his face online, they finally saw him in person, unguarded, no longer powerful. The federal case against him is massive. Prosecutors say that Pratt's company earned more than $17 million through its network of deceit, exploiting women from across the United States and abroad. Each count of sex trafficking carries a potential life sentence. And though justice moves slowly, it is moving. The most haunting part of the story is how ordinary it all looked from the outside. There were no drug wars, no assassinations, no secret hideouts in jungles. Just a modern office, glossy websites, and contracts written to look legitimate. Yet the destruction he caused was intimate and lasting. Today, in 2025, Michael James Pratt remains a key figure on the FBI's 10 most wanted list while his U.S. trial proceeds. He symbolizes a new face of crime in the digital age, where exploitation hides behind professionalism and manipulation travels faster than bullets. He reminds us that evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles for the camera. And for every victim still rebuilding her life, his name stands as both a warning and a promise that justice, however delayed, is still coming. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, May 29, 2006. It was a holiday weekend, the kind people spend laughing, grilling, and forgetting their worries. Families had gathered in South Shore Park, near the calm waters of Lake Michigan. Children played, couples danced to music, and the smell of barbecue hung in the air. No one knew that by the end of the afternoon, 2 people would be dead, 4 more bleeding on the grass, and 1 man would vanish into the shadows for more than 15 years. That man was Octaviano Juarez Coro. He wasn't a gangster or a career criminal, at least not then. He was an ordinary man caught in extraordinary anger. Born in Mexico in 1973, Juarez Coro came to the United States seeking work and stability. He married, had a daughter, and for a while lived quietly in Milwaukee's South Side. But as the years passed, his marriage fell apart. He and his wife separated, and arguments over money, custody, and betrayal grew sharper. Like so many stories that end in tragedy, it began with resentment that refused to fade. When the Memorial Day weekend arrived in 2006, his estranged wife joined friends and relatives for a picnic. It should have been an ordinary celebration. But Juarez Coro wasn't invited, and that, investigators later said, made him furious. He wanted to see his daughter that day. He wanted control again. Late in the afternoon, witnesses saw a red van pull up near the picnic area. Juarez Coro stepped out. He wasn't smiling. He walked straight toward the group, his voice rising. People remembered the shouting, the argument that followed, the tension building in the air like static before a storm. Then, without warning, he pulled out a handgun. In a moment, joy turned to chaos. He fired again and again, at close range, toward the crowd that only seconds earlier had been laughing. 2 people, including his estranged wife's friend, were killed instantly. 4 others were wounded before he fled. Children screamed. People dove behind picnic tables and trees. It was over in less than a minute. By the time police arrived, Juarez Coro had vanished. The van was gone, and witnesses were too shocked to understand what had just happened. What should have been an open and shut case became a manhunt that would last almost 2 decades. Detectives traced him through relatives, friends, and border crossings. They learned that within hours of the shooting, he had likely fled Milwaukee and headed south. Over the years, rumors placed him in California, Texas, even Mexico City. Each lead ended the same way: silence. He had become another ghost crossing between 2 worlds.
For years, the case remained one of Milwaukee's deepest scars. Every Memorial Day, reporters would revisit the tragedy, showing the same photos of smiling faces now gone. Detectives retired, new ones took over, and still there was nothing. It seemed as if the man responsible had simply disappeared into the landscape. Then, in 2021, 15 years after the shooting, the FBI placed Octaviano Juarez Coro on its 10 most wanted fugitives list. His name joined terrorists, cartel leaders, and fugitives accused of monstrous crimes. The Bureau offered a reward of $100,000 for information leading to his capture. His photo, an aging face, eyes that once looked angry, now just tired, appeared across America's news screens once again. And it worked. In February 2022, authorities received a crucial tip. It came from Mexico. Working with Mexican law enforcement, the FBI traced Juarez Coro to a neighborhood in Guadalajara, Jalisco. He was living under an alias, moving quietly, perhaps believing the world had forgotten. But justice hadn't. Agents surrounded the area. There was no standoff this time, no violence. After 16 years on the run, Octaviano Juarez Coro was arrested without resistance. He looked older, thinner, a man worn down by time and guilt. When U.S. Marshals brought him back to Wisconsin, news cameras captured the moment. For the victims' families, it was the first sense of closure they'd had in nearly 2 decades. The trial was set. He faced 2 counts of intentional homicide and multiple counts of attempted homicide. But before justice could fully play out, something unexpected happened. On January 22, 2023, just months after being extradited, Juarez Coro was found dead in his Milwaukee jail cell. Authorities ruled it a suicide. For some, it felt like justice denied. For others, it was an ending, however imperfect. The families of those he killed never saw him face sentencing, but at least they no longer had to fear him walking free. Even now, the South Shore Park shooting is remembered not only for its brutality, but for its randomness.
It showed how quickly anger can turn deadly, how one person's bitterness can destroy a day meant for joy. And it reminded law enforcement that fugitives can hide for years, but time has a way of catching up. Today, the picnic area has no signs of what happened there. Children play, music drifts from radios, and the smell of barbecue still hangs in the air every summer. But for those who remember, there's a quiet understanding that peace is fragile and the line between an ordinary day and tragedy can be just one moment, one decision, one trigger pull away. Octaviano Juarez Cotto's story ends there. A man who lost everything to rage and spent 16 years trying to outrun it.
It was just after midnight on April 12, 2015, and the small Dunkin' Donut shop in Hanover, Maryland was quiet. Only the hum of the refrigerators and the soft hiss of the coffee machines filled the air. A young couple worked the night shift together, Bhadresh Kumar Chittanbhai Patel and his wife Palak. To the few customers who came in that night, they looked like any other newlyweds, polite, reserved, quietly efficient. But beneath that calm, something was breaking. Bhadresh Kumar Patel was 24, a recent immigrant from India. He and Palak had married just a year earlier in 2014 in a traditional ceremony attended by both families. After their wedding, they traveled to the United States to visit relatives and, like so many young couples, hoped to build a new life. They worked together at a relative's Dunkin' Donuts franchise to save money. They rented a small apartment, talked about school, travel, and perhaps starting a family someday. But behind those small dreams, there was tension. Palak wanted to stay in America. She liked the independence, the promise of something different. Bhadresh Kumar wanted to return to India. He missed home and he feared that their visas were running out. Arguments began quietly, then more often, more bitter. He was described by friends as quiet and dutiful, but also traditional and controlling. He didn't like that Palak had begun talking about staying in the U.S. alone if he went back. To him, that was shameful. That night in April 2015, the argument followed them to work. Security cameras showed the couple moving behind the counter together. At 2:58 a.m., Palak walked into a small back kitchen. Seconds later, Bhadresh Kumar followed her. No one saw what happened next. A customer entered the shop a few minutes later. The front counter was empty. No one answered when he called out. He waited, looked around, then noticed something wrong. The back door was slightly open. When police arrived, they found Palak's body on the floor of the kitchen. She had been stabbed multiple times. The knife was left behind. There was no sign of a struggle, just silence. Bhadresh Kumar Patel was gone. Police reviewed the footage. Moments after the attack, he was seen walking calmly to the front of the shop, turning off a few switches and leaving through the back door into the cool night. Outside, surveillance from the mall area caught him walking briskly along a sidewalk, then vanishing from view. He left his passport, wallet, and identification at home. No cell phone. No trace. In the hours that followed, police searched the neighborhood, nearby hotels, and bus stations. By morning, Patel was already being listed as a person of interest. But investigators soon realized he'd planned more than a simple escape. He had no car, yet within hours he managed to vanish from one of Maryland's busiest corridors, just miles from Baltimore-Washington International Airport.
That detail became a haunting mystery. Had someone helped him? Did he board a flight using another person's documents? Or had he simply melted into the vast network of Indian expatriate communities across the U.S.? Over the next few days, his name spread nationwide. News outlets showed his picture,
A young man in a black hoodie, expression unreadable. Friends in India were stunned. Family members said they couldn't believe it. But detectives pieced together a troubling picture: the fight over returning home, Palak's wish to stay, his fear of dishonor. To police, it looked less like a moment of rage and more like a deliberate act. Within a month, the FBI obtained a federal arrest warrant charging Patel with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. A year later, in 2017, his case was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The reward? $250,000. Posters went up in airports, train stations, and temples. Agents visited Gujarati Indian communities across the country and abroad. Every lead was checked, every rumor chased. Each ended in silence. Investigators believe that Patel may have fled the country through New Jersey or New York, possibly using a false identity. Some tips placed him in Texas, others in Canada, still others back in India, a place where family ties and rural isolation can make a man disappear. None of it was confirmed. Years passed. Interpol listed him as a fugitive, and his image, calm, composed, became one of the most circulated wanted photos in modern FBI history. What made the story especially haunting was how ordinary it seemed. There was no drug cartel, no grand conspiracy, just a young husband, a kitchen, and a choice that ended a life. Detectives who worked the case often spoke of how quiet it all was. No screams were heard through the walls. No one in the parking lot saw a thing. It was as if, in those few minutes, time had stood still. Palak's family in India continues to mourn, still hoping her killer will be found. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, they light candles in her memory. Her mother once told reporters, "She was just starting her life. She trusted him." Those words have followed every FBI update since. As of 2025, Bhadresh Kumar Chetanbhai Patel remains at large. The FBI still lists him among its top 10 most wanted fugitives, calling him extremely dangerous and likely to flee if approached. He would now be 40 years old, possibly older-looking, maybe hiding under another name in a country that doesn't yet know his story. Somewhere, a man walks freely while his wife's memory lingers in the small Dunkin' Donuts that never reopened after that night. The lights have long been switched off, but for investigators, the case never goes dark. Because somewhere out there, Bhadresh Kumar Patel is still running.
And every time the FBI updates its list, his face reminds the world that even in the quietest corners of everyday life, horror can hide in plain sight. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, May 11th, 2012. Estrella Carrera, 26 years old, had just married the man she loved, Arnaldo Jimenez, a 30-year-old from Chicago. She wore a shimmering silver dress, smiled for photos, and celebrated late into the night with family and friends. No one could have imagined that within hours, that same dress would become evidence in one of the most haunting cases the FBI has ever pursued. Arnaldo and Estrella had known each other for a few years. Their relationship was complicated, passionate, but often volatile. Friends described them as a couple that loved hard and fought hard. They had a son together, and although arguments came often, there was hope that marriage would bring stability. On that May evening, surrounded by music and laughter, it seemed, for a brief moment, that they were finally at peace. After the reception, which lasted until around 4 a.m., the newlyweds left together in Arnaldo's Maserati. They were headed back to Estrella's apartment in Burbank, Illinois, just outside Chicago. What happened after that is known only through chilling fragments pieced together later by investigators. The next morning, Estrella didn't show up to pick up her children. Her family called her phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. By evening, worry had turned to panic. When police entered her apartment the next day, they found her body in the bathtub. She was still wearing her silver wedding dress.
She'd been stabbed multiple times, brutal, close-range wounds that spoke of rage, not randomness. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no robbery, no struggle that spilled into other rooms. The killer was someone she trusted. Within hours, detectives focused on one person, Arnaldo Jimenez. He was gone. Investigators quickly learned that Jimenez had not returned home. He hadn't gone to work, and his Maserati had vanished. Family members told police that in the early hours of that same morning, he had called his brother, Humberto, sounding shaken. He reportedly said that he and Estrella had gotten into a fight in the car after leaving the wedding party, a fight that turned violent. Then, according to police reports, he said something chilling. "I think I killed her." He told his brother he was driving south, toward Mexico. From that moment, the manhunt began. Within days, the FBI joined local police to trace his path. Records showed he stopped at a friend's house in Tennessee for a short time, possibly cleaning his car. From there, he continued through Texas, crossing the border into Mexico through Laredo. His car was later found abandoned in a parking lot in the city of Nuevo Laredo, less than a mile from the border. Inside, investigators discovered traces of blood, later confirmed to be Estrella's. From that point on, Jimenez disappeared into a labyrinth of border towns, family networks, and the chaos of northern Mexico. Authorities believe he received help from relatives living there. Several members of his family owned property in the region, including the city of Durango, where leads placed him multiple times. But every time investigators got close, he moved again. Back in Chicago, Estrella's murder devastated her family. Her sister recalled how happy she had looked the night of her wedding, how she twirled in that silver dress. No one could reconcile the image of that glowing bride with the crime scene photos that followed. Her children, one from a previous relationship, one with Arnaldo, were left without a mother.
In 2013, just a year after the murder, a federal warrant was issued charging Arnaldo Jimenez with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The state of Illinois had already charged him with first-degree murder, but the years dragged on, and he remained a ghost. He didn't use bank cards, avoided digital communication, and reportedly worked odd jobs under different names. In communities where everyone knows everyone, it's not hard to vanish if people are willing to keep your secret. In 2019, the FBI added him to the 10 most wanted fugitives list. A $250,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture. His photo appeared everywhere: airports, bus stations, even Spanish-language television across Mexico and the U.S. He was described as armed and dangerous, possibly traveling with family, and fluent in both English and Spanish. What makes the case so haunting is its intimacy. This wasn't a random act or a calculated crime for profit. It was something deeply personal, a burst of anger that turned into a lifetime of running. And for years, that's exactly what Arnaldo Jimenez has done: run. Every now and then, tips trickle in. Someone claims to have seen him in Puebla, or Monterrey, or Guadalajara. Each time, authorities check, and each time, they find nothing solid. He is still out there, somewhere, possibly with a new name, perhaps living quietly among people who have no idea who he really is. Estrella's family continues to wait for justice. Her sister once told a reporter, "He stole her life on the night that was supposed to be her happiest." Every year, on the anniversary of the wedding, the family gathers not to celebrate love, but to remember loss. As of 2025, Arnaldo Jimenez remains one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. He would now be 43 years old. Agents believe he still lives in Mexico, possibly shielded by relatives. He is wanted for murder, unlawful flight, and a betrayal so profound it shook even veteran investigators. He left behind a trail of pain,
a child who will grow up knowing what his father did, and a story that serves as a grim warning that love, when mixed with jealousy and rage, can turn the most joyful moments into the darkest crimes. And until the day Arnaldo Jimenez is found, justice will wait, just as the ghost of a silver wedding dress still lingers in that quiet apartment in Burbank.
5 names, 5 lives on the run. From cartel leaders to killers who vanished overnight. Each of them left behind fear, questions, and broken lives. But one thing's certain, the hunt isn't over. The FBI still watches, and justice, it always catches up. If these stories moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, where every week we bring you the world's darkest crimes, untold cases, and fugitives still out there hiding in plain sight. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the truth always leaves a trail.